Everyone wants to know how to get rich. That's the wrong question. Getting rich is actually the easy part. The math is not complicated. The strategy is not secret. The information is not hidden behind a paywall or locked inside some exclusive mastermind group that costs $10,000 to join. You can find the formula in a library book published in 1949. You can find it in a Reddit thread. You can find it scrawled on a napkin by any halfway decent financial advisor who hasn't been completely corrupted by commission incentives. The hard part, the brutally, savagely, almost impossibly hard part, is not getting rich. The hard part is not staying poor. Read that again. Let it land. Not staying poor is one of the most cognitively demanding, emotionally exhausting, systemically rigged challenges a human being can face in the modern world. And the reason almost nobody talks about it this way is because the people who design the conversation, the media, the financial industry, the self-help industrial complex, have a vested interest in making you believe the problem is your ambition, your hustle, your mindset. They want you chasing the upside. They don't want you examining the floor. Because the floor is where the real machinery lives. The floor is where the trap is built. And the trap is so elegant, so mathematically precise, so biologically sophisticated that most people who are caught in it will spend their entire lives believing they chose to be there. That's the genius of it. The cage is invisible. The bars are made of interest rates and cognitive load and social pressure and dopamine cycles and the quiet, grinding mathematics of compounding, working against you instead of for you. This is a story about the 7th year. It's about a specific moment on a curve that looks flat and useless and demoralizing for 6 years, and then suddenly, in year 7, begins to bend upward with a violence that defies intuition. It's about why the people who understand that curve become wealthy almost inevitably, and why the people who don't understand it, or who understand it but can't survive long enough to reach the bend, stay exactly where they are, running faster and faster on a treadmill that the system designed specifically for them. But before we get to year 7, we need to talk about gravity. Not metaphorical gravity, not inspirational gravity. Real gravity. The kind that kills you if you ignore it. Imagine you're standing at the base of a gravity well, not on the surface of the Earth. Inside a depression in space-time itself. The kind that physicists draw as a rubber sheet stretched downward by a heavy ball. Everything around you slopes inward and down. Every step you take requires energy just to stay in place. Moving laterally costs you. Moving upward costs you exponentially more. This is not a metaphor for poverty. This is poverty. This is the actual physics of the situation. The gravity well of financial scarcity operates by the same principles as the gravity well of a massive object. The deeper you are in it, the more energy you must expend simply to maintain your position. And the cruel irony, the thing that makes this particular well so vicious, is that the deeper you are, the more the system extracts from you just for the privilege of being there. Think about what it costs to be poor in America, or in the UK, or in any developed economy that has built its financial infrastructure around the assumption that you have capital to begin with. You don't have a car, so you take the bus. The bus takes 2 hours to get where the car takes 20 minutes. That's not just inconvenience, that's time. The only non-renewable resource you have being extracted from you at a rate that a wealthy person never experiences. You're paying a poverty tax measured in hours, not dollars. You don't have a washer and dryer, so you go to the laundromat. You pay $4 per load instead of the amortized cost of 30 cents per load that the person with a machine pays. You pay more per unit of clean clothing. You pay a poverty premium on your own hygiene. You can't buy in bulk because you don't have the cash flow or the storage space. So you buy small quantities at high per unit prices. The person with money buys the 48-pack of paper towels at Costco for 42 cents per roll. You buy the 2-pack at the corner store for $1.89 per roll. You pay 4.5 times more for the same paper towel. Not because you're stupid, because you're poor. This is the Vimes Boot Theory, articulated by Terry Pratchett with more economic precision than most academic papers manage. Samuel Vimes, a character in the Discworld novels, observes that a man who can afford $50 boots buys boots that last 10 years. A man who can only afford $10 boots buys boots that fall apart in a year. Over 10 years, the poor man spends $100 on boots and has wet feet half the time. The rich man spends $50 and has dry feet always. Being poor costs more. Full stop. But Pratchett's insight, brilliant as it is, only scratches the surface of the actual mathematics. The real penalty isn't just that you pay more per unit. The real penalty is that the system charges you interest on the gap. When you don't have $500 in savings, and 40% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing, every unexpected event becomes a debt event. Your car breaks down. You put it on a credit card at 24% APR. You pay the minimum because that's all you can afford. The $500 repair becomes $800 over 2 years. Meanwhile, the person with savings pays $500 cash, loses nothing to interest, and their savings account, even at a modest 4%, is quietly generating $20 a year for them while they sleep. The gap between those two people isn't $300. The gap is the entire trajectory of their financial lives, diverging from a single moment of emergency. And here's where the physics becomes truly brutal. The person in the gravity well is not just paying more for goods and services, they are paying more for money itself. Payday loans charge 300% to 400% APR. Rent-to-own furniture stores charge effective interest rates of 100% to 200%. Subprime auto loans charge 18% to 29%. The financial system has constructed an entire parallel economy for people without capital. And that economy is designed with one purpose: to extract maximum value from people who have the least of it. This is not an accident. This is not a market inefficiency. This is the system working exactly as designed. The gravity well is not a bug. It is the product. And the deeper you are in it, the more energy you must spend just to stay alive, which means you have less energy to spend on escape velocity, which means you stay in the well, which means the system continues to extract from you, which means you go deeper. This is the loop. This is the trap, and it is mathematically self-reinforcing in a way that no amount of individual hustle can overcome, not without understanding the specific physics of the escape. Now, let's talk about what the gravity well does to the instrument you need most to escape it: your brain. Not your motivation, not your discipline, not your character, your actual, physical, electrochemical brain. The 3-pound organ that is supposed to be your primary tool for solving the problem of your own life. In 2013, a team of researchers published a landmark study in the journal Science. Sendil Mullainathan of Harvard and Eldar Shafir of Princeton ran a series of experiments on cognitive function under conditions of financial scarcity. The results were not subtle. People who were experiencing financial stress, not poverty, just stress about money, showed a measurable reduction in cognitive function, equivalent to losing 13 IQ points. 13 points. That's the difference between average intelligence and borderline impairment. That's the difference between solving a problem and being unable to see the solution even when it's directly in front of you. The mechanism is cortisol. When you are under chronic stress, the kind of stress that comes from not knowing if you can make rent, from watching your bank account drain toward zero, from the constant low-grade terror of financial precarity, your body floods itself with cortisol. Cortisol is a survival hormone.
It is extraordinarily good at what it was designed to do, which is help you survive immediate physical threats. It sharpens your focus on the threat. It suppresses everything that isn't immediately relevant to survival. The problem is that cortisol cannot distinguish between a predator and a credit card bill. When cortisol is chronically elevated, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, abstract reasoning, impulse control, and the ability to delay gratification, goes partially offline. Not completely, but enough. Enough that the decisions you make under chronic financial stress are measurably worse than the decisions you would make if the stress were removed. This is not a character flaw. This is neuroscience. The person who is drowning in debt and making what looks like irrational financial decisions, buying lottery tickets, making impulse purchases, choosing the payday loan over the credit union, is not stupid. They are operating with a cognitively impaired instrument in a system that requires peak cognitive performance to navigate. They are trying to solve a calculus problem with a calculator that's missing half its buttons. And then the system looks at the results and says, "See? They make bad decisions. That's why they're poor." The cruelty of this is almost elegant, but it gets worse. Because the brain, under chronic stress, doesn't just become less effective at planning, it actively seeks relief. And the relief it seeks is immediate, chemical, and almost always counterproductive to long-term escape. Dopamine is the brain's reward chemical. Under normal conditions, dopamine is released in anticipation of rewards. It motivates you to pursue goals, to delay gratification, to work toward distant outcomes. But under chronic stress, the dopamine system becomes dysregulated. The brain starts seeking immediate dopamine hits to compensate for the chronic cortisol load. It starts self-medicating. This is why the correlation between poverty and what gets labeled as bad habits is not a coincidence. Alcohol, gambling, junk food, social media, shopping, these are all dopamine delivery mechanisms. They are the brain's attempt to create moments of relief in a life that offers very few of them. They are not moral failures. They are biological responses to an impossible situation. And they are, of course, expensive, both financially and cognitively. The dopamine trap is the final lock on the cage. You are in a gravity well that extracts money from you at every turn. The stress of being in the gravity well impairs your cognitive function. The impaired cognitive function makes it harder to plan your escape. The lack of escape increases the stress. The stress drives you toward immediate relief. The immediate relief costs money and cognitive resources, which deepens the gravity well. The loop is complete. The trap is closed. Unless you understand the physics of the escape, here is what almost nobody tells you about compound interest. It is not a financial concept. It is a physics concept. It is the mathematical description of exponential growth, the same process that governs the spread of viruses, the growth of populations, the expansion of the universe in its earliest moments. It is one of the most fundamental patterns in nature, and it operates with the same indifference to human preference as gravity itself. Albert Einstein may or may not have called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. The quote is probably apocryphal, but the sentiment is accurate. And the reason it's accurate is not because compound interest is magical. It's because compound interest is exponential, and human beings are constitutionally, neurologically, evolutionarily incapable of intuitively understanding exponential growth. We understand linear growth. If you save $100 a month,
You understand that after 12 months, you have $1,200. That's linear. That's addition. Our brains evolved to handle addition. We spent hundreds of thousands of years counting things. Animals, berries, enemies. And addition served us perfectly well. Exponential growth is different. Exponential growth is multiplication. And multiplication, applied repeatedly over time, produces results that are so far outside our intuitive range that they feel like magic when we first encounter them. Here is the curve. You invest $10,000 at 10% annual return. At the end of year 1, you have $11,000. You made $1,000. That feels okay. Not exciting, but okay. Year 2, $12,100. You made $1,100. Slightly better. Year 3, $13,310. Year 4, $14,641. Year 5, $16,105. Year 6, $17,716. 6 years in, you've made $7,716 on your initial $10,000. That's a 77% return over 6 years. Sounds decent, but it doesn't feel like anything has fundamentally changed. You started with $10,000. You have $17,716. You're not rich. You're just slightly less not rich. This is the valley of despair. This is where most people quit.
This is where the math looks like it's lying to you. Because you've been doing everything right for 6 years and you still don't feel the momentum. You still feel like you're pushing a boulder uphill. You still feel like the effort isn't matching the result. And then, year 7 happens. Year 7, $19,487. You made $1,771 in a single year. More than you made in years 1 and 2 combined. Year 8, $21,436. Year 9, $23,579. Year 10, $25,937. By year 10, you're making $2,358 in a single year. By year 15, you're making $3,797 in a single year. By year 20, you're making $6,116 in a single year. By year 30, you're making $15,863 in a single year. On the same initial $10,000 investment, without adding a single additional dollar. The money is now working harder than you are. The money is now generating more annual income than many people earn from actual labor. And it will continue to accelerate year after year with increasing velocity. Because the returns are now compounding on top of returns that compounded on top of returns. This is the inflection point. This is the bend in the curve. This is year 7.
Save yourself,
But here's the thing about year 7 that nobody talks about. Year 7 is not a destination. Year 7 is a threshold. It's the point at which the mathematics of compounding shifts from feeling like a slow, grinding, barely worth it process to feeling like an unstoppable force. It's the point at which the curve stops being flat and starts being steep. It's the point at which the system, the same system that was working against you in the gravity well, starts working for you. The question is not whether year 7 exists. It does. The mathematics are not in dispute. The question is whether you can survive long enough to reach it. Let's be precise about what surviving means in this context. It doesn't mean not dying. It means not quitting. It means not withdrawing the investment. It means not letting the gravity well pull you back in.
It means maintaining the discipline to keep the money in the system, compounding, growing, bending toward that inflection point, while simultaneously managing all the forces that are trying to pull it back out. And those forces are formidable. The first force is time preference. Human beings are wired to prefer immediate rewards over delayed rewards. This is not a character flaw. It's an evolutionary adaptation. For most of human history, the future was genuinely uncertain.
A bird in the hand was worth two in the bush, because the bush might not be there tomorrow. The predator might get you. The drought might come. The tribe might move. Delayed gratification was not always the rational choice. But in the modern world, where the future is relatively predictable and the compound interest curve is mathematically guaranteed, the preference for immediate rewards is a liability. It's the biological equivalent of a software bug. Code that was written for one environment running in a completely different environment and producing catastrophic results. The person who cashes out their 401k at 35 to cover a short-term expense is not stupid. They are running ancient software on a modern problem. They are choosing the bird in the hand because their brain, shaped by millions of years of evolution, genuinely cannot feel the weight of the two birds in the bush that they're giving up. The second force is social pressure. This one is less discussed, but equally powerful. When you start accumulating capital, when you start saying no to the vacation, no to the new car, no to the restaurant, no to the concert, you will encounter resistance. Not from strangers, from the people closest to you, from your family, from your friends, from your community. This is the crab bucket effect, and it is one of the most underestimated forces in personal finance. The crab bucket is a real phenomenon. Put a single crab in a bucket and it will climb out. Put multiple crabs in a bucket and none of them will escape. Not because the bucket is too deep, but because every time one crab gets close to the top, the others pull it back down. Not out of malice, out of instinct, out of the simple, mechanical fact of their situation. Human social groups operate by similar dynamics. When one member of a group starts behaving differently, starts accumulating instead of spending, starts investing instead of consuming, starts saying no to the shared rituals of the group experiences this as a threat. Not consciously, not maliciously. The pressure to conform, to return to the shared baseline, is real and powerful and relentless. You've changed. You think you're better than us. Why are you being so cheap? You only live once. Money isn't everything. These are not arguments. They are gravitational forces. They are the social equivalent of the gravity well, pulling you back toward the baseline, toward the shared consumption patterns of the group, toward the behaviors that feel normal and comfortable and socially safe, and that guarantee you will never reach year 7. The third force is the market itself. The stock market, over any given 10-year period in modern history, has returned an average of approximately 10% annually. But it does not return 10% smoothly. It returns 30% one year and loses 20% the next. It crashes, it recovers, it crashes again. And every crash is a test of whether you understand the mathematics well enough to stay in the system when every instinct is screaming at you to get out. The people who sold in March 2020, when the market dropped 34% in 33 days, locked in their losses. The people who stayed, or better, who bought more, watched the market recover completely within 5 months and go on to reach new all-time highs. The mathematics rewarded patience, the biology punished it. This is the fundamental tension of the compound interest game. The mathematics are on your side, the biology is not. The system is designed to reward the people who can override their biological programming long enough to let the mathematics work. And the mathematics take time. They take years. They take the grinding, demoralizing, apparently pointless years before the curve bends. So how do you survive the flat part of the curve? Not with motivation. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. Not with willpower. Willpower is a finite resource, and the gravity well is designed to exhaust it. Not with inspiration. Inspiration fades. You survive with systems, with architecture, with the deliberate construction of an environment that makes the right behavior the default behavior, and the wrong behavior the effortful behavior. The first system is what I call the monk protocol. The monk protocol is not about deprivation for its own sake. It's about the strategic, temporary, radical reduction of cognitive load. Remember the 13 IQ points. Remember the cortisol. Remember the dopamine trap. The monk protocol is the process of systematically removing the sources of cognitive drain from your life. Not forever, but long enough to restore your prefrontal cortex to full function. This means cutting the subscriptions you don't need. Not because $15 a month matters in absolute terms, but because every financial decision you make, every time you look at your bank account and see money going out, is a small cortisol event. Multiply that by dozens of subscriptions, dozens of small, unnecessary expenses, and you have a chronic, low-grade stress load that is quietly degrading your cognitive function every single day. This means cutting the social obligations that drain you financially. The destination bachelorette party, the group vacation you can't afford, the birthday dinner at the expensive restaurant. Not because you don't love the people involved, because you cannot afford to let social pressure override your financial architecture during the critical years before the curve bends. This means cutting the information diet, the news, the social media, the constant stream of other people's consumption, their new cars, their vacations, their renovations. That activates your comparison instincts and makes your own disciplined, boring, apparently pointless accumulation feel inadequate. The algorithm is not your friend. The algorithm is a dopamine delivery system designed to keep you engaged, and engagement is the enemy of the long-term thinking that compound interest requires. The monk protocol is not permanent. It's a reset. It's the process of clearing enough cognitive space to actually think, to actually plan, to actually see the curve and understand where you are on it and what it will look like in year 7 and year 10 and year 20. Once you've cleared the space, you build the moat. The moat is your defense against the gravity well pulling you back in. And the moat is not built from savings alone. Savings are necessary, but not sufficient. The moat is built from skills, specifically from the intersection of skills that creates a unique value proposition that the market cannot easily replicate or replace. Here is the brutal truth about labor in the modern economy. A single skill, no matter how refined, is a commodity. If you are a good accountant, you are competing with every other good accountant in your city, your country, and increasingly the world. If you are a good programmer, you are competing with programmers in India and Eastern Europe who can do the same work for a fraction of your cost. If you are a good writer, you are competing with AI systems that can produce competent prose at essentially zero marginal cost. Single skills are subject to the same commodity pricing dynamics as any other commodity. Supply increases, price falls. This is not a moral judgment. This is economics. But the intersection of 2 or 3 skills, particularly skills that don't usually appear together, creates something that is genuinely rare. And rare things command premium prices. The accountant, who also understands behavioral psychology and can explain financial concepts in ways that actually change client behavior, is not competing with other accountants. They are in a category of one. The programmer, who also understands design and can build products that are both functional and beautiful, is not competing with offshore developers. They are in a different market entirely.
The writer, who also understands data analysis and can translate complex quantitative research into compelling narrative, is not competing with AI. They are doing something that AI, at least for now, cannot do. Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, articulated this principle with characteristic bluntness. Be in the top 25% of 2 or 3 different skills, and you will be more valuable than almost anyone who is in the top 1% of a single skill. Because the intersection is rare. Because the combination is hard to replicate. Because the market pays a premium for synthesis. This is the moat. Not a wall, not a fortress. A moat. A defensive perimeter that makes it expensive and difficult for the market to replace you. That gives you pricing power. That gives you the ability to generate income that exceeds your expenses by enough to actually feed the compound interest machine. Because here's the thing about the compound interest curve that the financial industry doesn't emphasize enough. The curve only works if you're actually putting money into it. The mathematics of compounding are beautiful and inevitable, but they require fuel. They require the consistent, disciplined, boring act of taking money that you earned and putting it into assets that generate returns. And you can only do that if you earn more than you spend. Which means you need income that exceeds your expenses by a meaningful margin. Which means you need skills that command premium prices. Which means you need the moat. The moat and the compound interest curve are not separate strategies. They are 2 components of the same system. The moat generates the fuel. The curve converts the fuel into acceleration. Together, they create escape velocity. Escape velocity. Let's talk about that. In physics, escape velocity is the minimum speed an object must reach to break free from a gravitational field without further propulsion. For Earth, it's approximately 11.2 kilometers per second. Below that speed, gravity wins. Above it, you're free. The financial equivalent of escape velocity is the point at which your passive income, the income generated by your assets, exceeds your expenses. This is what the financial independence community calls the crossover point. It's the moment when you no longer need to trade your time for money. It's the moment when the system is working for you instead of against you. But here's what the financial independence community often glosses over. The crossover point is not the same as year 7. Year 7 is the inflection point, the moment when the curve starts bending upward with real velocity. The crossover point might be year 15 or year 20 or year 25, depending on your savings rate, your returns, and your expenses. The relationship between year 7 and the crossover point is this. Year 7 is when you first feel the momentum. It's when the mathematics start to feel real rather than theoretical. It's when the returns in a single year start to exceed what you could earn from a part-time job. It's when the system starts to feel like it's on your side. And that feeling, that shift in the felt experience of the mathematics is crucial. Because the flat part of the curve, the first 6 years, is where most people quit. Not because they don't understand the mathematics intellectually, but because they can't feel the mathematics. They can't feel the momentum. They can't feel the curve bending. They just feel like they're saving money and nothing is happening and the sacrifice isn't worth it. Year 7 is when the sacrifice starts to feel worth it. Year 7 is when the mathematics become visceral rather than abstract. Year 7 is when the compound interest machine starts to feel like a machine rather than a theory. But you have to get there first. Getting there requires solving the social problem, not just the financial problem. The financial problem is actually the easier one. The mathematics are clear, the strategy is well documented, the tools are available. Index funds, tax-advantaged accounts, consistent contributions, time. These are not secrets. These are not complicated. A reasonably intelligent person can understand the financial strategy in an afternoon. The social problem is harder. The social problem is the crab bucket.
The social problem is the family that doesn't understand why you're not buying a new car. The social problem is the friends who think you're being cheap when you decline the expensive dinner. The social problem is the culture that equates consumption with success and savings with deprivation. The social problem is that the people around you, the people you love, the people whose opinions matter to you, the people whose approval you have been conditioned since childhood to seek, are often, unintentionally, working against your financial escape. This is not their fault. They are operating from the same biological programming, the same cultural conditioning, the same short-term time preference that makes the flat part of the compound interest curve feel pointless. They are not your enemies, but they are, in this specific context, a gravitational force. The solution is not to abandon your relationships. The solution is to supplement them, to deliberately, strategically, intentionally expose yourself to a different set of influences, to find the people who have already reached year 7, who have already felt the curve bend, who can tell you from experience what the other side looks like. In practice, this means books. It means podcasts. It means the biographies of people who built wealth from nothing and documented the process. It means finding the virtual mentors, the people who cannot be your friends in the conventional sense, but whose thinking can reshape your own. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, Morgan Housel, Nassim Taleb. These are not just names to drop. These are people who have spent decades thinking carefully about the mathematics of wealth and the psychology of decision-making, and who have written down what they've found. Their books are not self-help. They are operating manuals for a different way of thinking about money and time and risk. The goal is not to become them. The goal is to spend enough time in their mental world that your own thinking starts to shift, that the long-term time horizon starts to feel natural rather than forced, that the flat part of the curve starts to feel like progress rather than futility, that the social pressure to consume starts to feel like noise rather than signal. This is what I mean by replacing the crab bucket with virtual mentors. You cannot always choose your physical environment, but you can choose your intellectual environment. And your intellectual environment shapes your thinking, and your thinking shapes your decisions. And your decisions determine whether you reach year 7. Let's talk about the specific mechanics of what happens at year 7, because the mathematics deserve more than a passing reference. The rule of 72 is a simple formula for estimating how long it takes for an investment to double at a given rate of return. Divide 72 by the annual return rate, and you get the approximate number of years to double. At 10% annual return, your money doubles approximately every 7.2 years. This is not a coincidence. This is why year 7 is the inflection point. In year 7, you are approaching your first doubling. Your $10,000 has become approximately $19,487. But more importantly, the rate of growth is now accelerating. The returns in year 7 are larger than the returns in years 1 through 3 combined. And the returns in year 8 will be larger than year 7, and year 9 larger than year 8. The doubling sequence is what makes compound interest feel like magic to people who encounter it for the first time. $10,000 becomes $20,000 in 7.2 years. Then $40,000 in another 7.2 years. Then $80,000. Then $160,000. Then $320,000. Then $640,000. Then $1,280,000. 7 doublings, 50 years. $10,000 becomes $1.28 million. But here's the part that breaks people's intuition. More than half of that final wealth, more than $640,000, is generated in the last doubling.
the last 7.2 years, the last 14% of the time period. This is the mathematics of exponential growth.
The early years are not where the wealth is created. The early years are where the foundation is laid. The wealth is created in the later years, when the base is large enough that the percentage returns translate into enormous absolute numbers. This is why patience is not just a virtue in the compound interest game. Patience is the strategy. Patience is the mechanism. Patience is the thing that separates the people who reach the later doublings from the people who quit in the early ones. And this is why the flat part of the curve is so dangerous. Because the flat part is real. The first few years genuinely do feel flat. The returns genuinely are small in absolute terms. The sacrifice genuinely does feel disproportionate to the reward. And the people who quit during the flat part are not wrong about what they're experiencing. They're just wrong about what it means. What it means is that you're building the base. What it means is that you're laying the foundation for the doublings that come later. What it means is that the boring, grinding, apparently pointless years are the most important years. Not because they generate the most wealth, but because they are the prerequisite for the years that do. Now let's talk about the difference between assets and liabilities, because this distinction is the hinge on which everything else turns. Robert Kiyosaki popularized this distinction in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and despite the book's many flaws and oversimplifications, this particular insight is correct and important. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. The path to financial independence is the path of accumulating assets and minimizing liabilities. But the insight goes deeper than Kiyosaki's version of it. The real distinction is not just between things that generate income and things that cost money. The real distinction is between things that work for you while you sleep and things that require your active participation to generate value. Your labor is not an asset in the financial sense. Your labor generates income, but only when you are actively providing it. Stop working and the income stops. Your labor is a liability in the sense that it requires your time, your finite, non-renewable, irreplaceable time to generate returns. An asset, in the true sense, is something that generates returns without requiring your active participation. A stock portfolio, a rental property, a business that runs without you. Intellectual property, a book, a course, a piece of software that generates royalties while you sleep. These are assets. These are the things that work for you in year 7 and year 10 and year 20, compounding their returns while you do other things. The transition from selling your labor to owning assets is the fundamental transition of wealth building. It is the transition from being on the wrong side of the mathematics to being on the right side. It is the transition from paying compound interest to receiving it. And it is a transition that requires capital to make, which is why the early years, the flat years, the grinding years, the years before the curve bends, are so critical. Because those years are when you are accumulating the capital that will eventually be converted into assets. Those years are when you are building the base that will eventually generate the doublings. The person who understands this treats the flat years differently. They don't experience the flat years as futility. They experience them as construction. They are building something. The building is invisible for a long time. The foundation is underground. But the foundation is real, and it is load-bearing. And without it, the structure that comes later cannot stand. There is a psychological shift that happens around year 7 that is as important as the mathematical shift. Before year 7, you are managing your money. You are making decisions about where to put it, how much to save, how to allocate it. You are the active agent. The money is the passive object. After year 7, after the curve bends, after the returns start to feel real, after the first doubling approaches, something changes. The money starts to feel like a partner rather than a tool. The returns start to feel like they have their own momentum. The system starts to feel like it's working with you rather than requiring you to push it. This is not mysticism. This is the psychological experience of exponential growth becoming visceral. It's the moment when the mathematics stop being abstract and start being felt, and it changes everything about how you relate to the process. Before year 7, discipline is required to keep the money in the system. After year 7, it becomes harder to take the money out. Not because of discipline, but because you can see the trajectory. You can feel where it's going. You can see the next doubling approaching, and the one after that, and the one after that. Taking the money out starts to feel like cutting down a tree that's just beginning to bear fruit. This psychological shift is self-reinforcing. The more you can feel the momentum, the easier it is to maintain the behaviors that sustain it. The easier it is to say no to the unnecessary expense. The easier it is to resist the social pressure. The easier it is to stay in the system during the market crashes and the economic downturns and the moments when every instinct says to get out. Year 7 is not just a mathematical milestone. It's a psychological one. It's the point at which the compound interest machine becomes self-motivating, where the evidence of its own power becomes the fuel that keeps you committed to it. But you have to get there first. And getting there requires surviving the flat part. And surviving the flat part requires understanding at a deep level what the flat part actually is. The flat part is not failure. The flat part is not evidence that the strategy doesn't work. The flat part is the price of admission to the exponential part. It is the cost of the later doublings. It is the investment in the future returns. Every year you spend in the flat part is a year you are buying future acceleration. Every dollar you keep in the system during the flat part is a dollar that will participate in the doublings that come later. Every sacrifice you make during the flat part is a sacrifice that is being converted, invisibly, into future wealth. This is the reframe that changes everything. Not the flat part as futility, the flat part as investment. Not the early years as wasted, the early years as foundational. Not the discipline as deprivation, the discipline as construction. Let's be honest about who this is hard for. It's hardest for the people who are deepest in the gravity well. The people who are paying the poverty premium on every purchase. The people whose cognitive function is being degraded by chronic financial stress. The people whose social environment is actively working against their financial escape. The people who don't have $10,000 to invest, who are starting from zero or from negative, from debt. For these people, the compound interest curve is not just a mathematical challenge, it's a survival challenge. Before you can benefit from compound interest, you have to have capital to compound. Before you have capital to compound, you have to generate surplus income. Before you generate surplus income, you have to escape the poverty premium. Before you escape the poverty premium, you have to restore your cognitive function. Before you restore your cognitive function, you have to reduce the chronic stress. Before you reduce the chronic stress, you have to create some financial stability. This is not a linear process, it's a systems problem. And systems problems require systems solutions. The Munger protocol is the first system. Radical reduction of cognitive load. Elimination of unnecessary expenses, not primarily for the money saved, but for the cognitive space recovered. The goal is to get the cortisol down, to get the prefrontal cortex back online, to restore the cognitive function that the gravity well has been degrading. The moat is the second system, the deliberate cultivation of rare skill combinations that command premium prices. The goal is to generate surplus income, income that exceeds expenses by enough to actually feed the compound interest machine. The virtual mentors are the third system, the deliberate replacement of the crab bucket's gravitational pull with the intellectual influence of people who have already escaped.
The goal is to reshape the thinking, to make the long-term time horizon feel natural, to make the flat part of the curve feel like progress, to make the social pressure to consume feel like noise. And the fourth system is the most important one: automation. Automate the investment. Set up the automatic transfer. Make the contribution to the index fund happen before you see the money, before you can spend it, before the dopamine system can redirect it toward immediate relief. Remove the decision from the equation entirely. Because here's the thing about discipline: it's a finite resource. Every decision you make depletes it slightly. Every temptation you resist costs you something.
The goal is not to become more disciplined. The goal is to design a system that requires less discipline, that makes the right behavior the default behavior, the automatic behavior, the behavior that happens without requiring a decision. The automatic investment is the most powerful tool in the compound interest arsenal, not because it's complicated, because it removes the human from the equation at the moment when the human is most likely to make the wrong decision. The cage is open. That's the thing that nobody tells you. The cage that the gravity well creates, the cage of poverty premiums and cognitive impairment and social pressure and biological time preference, is not locked. It has never been locked. The door is open. It has always been open. But the door is heavy, and it opens against the current, and the current is strong. The current of the system, the current of biology, the current of social pressure, the current of the flat part of the curve that looks like nothing is happening when actually everything is happening. Most people don't walk through the door, not because they can't, because they don't believe the door is real. Because the flat part of the curve looks like evidence that the door leads nowhere. Because the social pressure makes walking through the door feel like betrayal. Because the biology makes the immediate reward feel more real than the distant one. But the door is real, and the curve is real, and year 7 is real. The mathematics are not in dispute. The exponential growth is not a theory. The doublings are not a promise. They are a mathematical certainty, given time and consistency, and the discipline to stay in the system when every instinct says to get out. The question is not whether the mathematics work. The question is whether you will. The question is whether you can survive the flat part, whether you can resist the crab bucket, whether you can override the dopamine trap, whether you can maintain the monk protocol long enough to restore your cognitive function, whether you can build the moat, whether you can find the virtual mentors, whether you can automate the investment and remove yourself from the equation at the moments when you are most likely to sabotage yourself. The question is whether you can hold on until year 7, because year 7 is coming. The mathematics guarantee it. The curve bends at year 7, whether you believe in it or not. The only variable is whether you're still in the system when it does. The people who are in the system at year 7, who have survived the flat part, who have resisted the gravity well, who have kept the money compounding through the boring, grinding, apparently pointless early years, those people will feel the curve bend. They will feel the momentum shift. They will feel the mathematics become visceral. They will feel for the first time what it's like to be on the right side of the exponential. And then they will understand, in their bones rather than just their heads, why the flat part was worth it. The cage is open. The door is heavy. The current is strong. Walk through anyway. Year 7 is waiting.